we take something that's considered like collateral, like a scrap, the data in dogs. I mean, it was used for something, but kind of let's move on. We take that and we almost repurpose that in a really meaningful way that impacts a family, because the dogs, they have such benefit for mental health. They are really, really, really more and more important in everyone's lives.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host Pritish Sanyal, and you're listening to the 1% Project. Conversations that will help you understand how some of the smartest minds build, scale, and operate new ideas and ventures. If you enjoy these conversations, do share and subscribe. My next guest on the 1% Project is Christina Lopes. Christina is the CEO and the co-founder of the One Health company, leaders in precision medicine for dogs with cancer. One Health company is a Y Combinator incubated startup backed by Andreessen, Horowitz, and Tau Ventures. Christina also has been recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. In this conversation, she talks about building a bio company in Silicon Valley, learnings from Y Combinator, and who should apply. Why have the likes of Tau Ventures and Andreessen Horowitz invested in the One Health company, building a business in a market with established incumbents, and what it takes to build an effective multidisciplinary team. At the end of this conversation, I share my key takeaways, and we kick this conversation off with Christina asking her about the One Health company and how she narrowed down the product scope.
I've been always after kind of closing gaps of big unmet needs that perhaps aren't in, say, everyone's mindset or doesn't have yet an asset class, basically, but it's a big need. And I think the part that's kind of been my superpower has been coalescing this big need with the capital, with the people, with the technology, and bringing it together and boom, turn it into something that's a need that has, let's say, an economy behind it and a driver. Like, I call that making a movement. And that's kind of been my MO. And I worked before, I'm from Brazil. I always worked with emerging markets, actually, and middle income countries or developing countries. And I did that both in a point of view of bringing the capital, but also in a nonprofit point of view. And eventually got into global health and health inequities. In that was when I was saying I'm really interested in those helping to serve better those that are marginalized and voiceless, and closing the access to especially healthcare, because so much of the technology already exists. Some of it isn't even that expensive, but there's just this access gap. And so, and I know you're from India, and actually I went to India and like looked at different things they were doing. I was very in that movement. Then I met my co-founder, and I used to say, that I'm interested in those that are marginalized and voiceless, but I wasn't dogs, okay? And I met my co-founder, and who had gone to vet school and had this kind of profound insight that on one hand, you have all these animals in the world that need better care. The technology is there. And then on the other hand, you also have a different machine, which is the R&D machine, that frankly tests on animals and in order to move things to people. And there's no connection between these worlds. And could it be that we could make something really for the 21st century, which isn't destructive, but actually is kind of a win-win for everyone? It's just a different paradigm. And then we honed in on like the dog specifically and cancer. We thought, could we take the dog from being a subject in R&D to a patient? Could that be? And can we think of this in a two sides of the leash versus this or that, or kind of like an economy where you have to abuse something to get a gain? You know what I mean? We're like, let's get out of this.
Yeah.
And that's where we launched One Health and PhytoCure. And we really thought of it as a movement. And we identified pretty quickly that cancer in dogs is the number one killer. It's not, and it's not understood. Like nobody knows that, but when you look at the numbers, you learn. The other thing for me that I realized was the incidence and prevalence is just very high, meaning in the US, 6 million dogs were diagnosed with cancer last year. But that's compared to like 1.8 million people. And there's many more people than there are dogs. You start to see that, whoa, hold on, this is pretty big. This is a big problem. And like, there's no movement around it. There's no conversation. There's no roadmap. You hear about it because once you mention it to people, they're like, oh, my cousin's dog, my neighbor, my dad. You start to really like hear it more. But our role is to come in and really bring all of this together, close the gap in terms of technology, lift from the human side, and lift those technologies and kind of advancements that were actually already tested on dogs. There's a lot of data already there, especially safety and tox data, and then bring it back to the dog and help build that and kind of move forward. But what's particularly interesting is what we learn in the dog, it might just help what we do for humans. So there's a moment now where we're basically trying to close the gap of like kind of access and really bring cancer care for dogs to the century. And it just has to happen. It's like mission one. But we may be able to do things that in the human world do certain rigidities that don't even make sense, are really hard to figure out. And that's kind of the promise and the hope.
I actually didn't know that there is humans only 1.8 million. When I say only, that's a big number, but
Right.
compared to dogs, it's probably significantly lower. What does it take to actually build a bio company in Silicon Valley?
That's a great question. So, first of all, we're part of a movement that is kind of a departure of the past or how biotech traditionally has been, which has been one molecule, the one target,
Hmm.
huge bets on that. And if it doesn't go forward or it's not the disease state that has a lot of capital, it's like you're out. And we're part of this movement trying to redefine that, and I'm really interested in it because part of my broader mission in life, which is to close these gaps. So if we can figure out how to accelerate R&D in a way that's beneficial, in a way that accelerates cures to those who need it, then my mind even goes. We did kind of part of our journey. We did Y Combinator in winter of 2018, and they've actually been doubling down on the biospace, traditionally really tech. And I think their contribution, and it's not just them, but they're really thinking of it in this different way, in a platform approach, just really rethinking. And look, in the end, they won. This is starting to win. The first sign
Hmm.
is the Moderna vaccine, which is comes from highly, highly think of engineering. It's like a hardware world, and really thinking how to do it as a platform approach. So it is already a new thing and it's impacting how we look at COVID and care for COVID.
Yeah.
Similarly, we're part of that story. In the Valley, I think there's a movement of that. And then our first big funder, Andreessen Horowitz, the A16Z Bio Fund, is really, I think it says bio's eating the world. And it's very much the intersection of computation, the intersection of tech, kind of how tech and biology can meet. And we are really taking the company is a very tech type company, attacking a really, really tough problems. We're into speed, we're into the wave culture of like we don't drop balls, certain
Hmm.
things that we're taking that landing from the tech world here.
Who would you say should apply to a program like YC? And what did you learn about growth and scaling a B2B business?
First, I would say that everyone thinking of starting a business should at least look at the application
Hmm.
and do it as an exercise of clarity and just maybe do it
Yeah.
like just for your own self. So that's one. Two, I think it's probably better if you have an idea that already has a little bit of legs versus really none, that you can use the time there because they really help you think through hard problems. It's kind of better if you're already in the game a bit and you come up with hard problems and you can like use it very quickly. The partners are amazing and you really have this thought partnership that you pose it and they just have so much data. Like insane. They've just seen it all. You can very quickly kind of almost do a leap that if you didn't have that, you just wouldn't be able to. You can see from what I'm saying, the more you already are in the game, not too much in the game, they're
Yeah.
really good at the 0 to 1. But the more you're in that, a little bit more about your customers, not really know them, but know a bit. The more you're figuring out the product, but you're kind of in a situation where you can be in the game and be getting feedback, the better. Meaning, if you're too much in an ideation moment, I don't know if it would be as good. You see what I mean?
You're almost at the MVP or at the MVP stage, and maybe that's when you may probably say that it's worthwhile applying.
Pretty close. Like we didn't have everything together, but we very quickly in YC got it together. And then we're able to start working on other things like how to build custom, like just all sorts of things.
That's an interesting segue. What did you learn from them or during the cohort about customers or how to take the next steps? What were the things that you thought were really took you to the next level being a part of YC?
I think first and foremost, this concept, and I believe it's an essay by Paul Graham, of do things that don't scale. And I know it sounds super counterintuitive, but it was amazing. And I use it now, even now, as we're learning something new. I'm like, no, hold on, do it super manual.
Hmm.
Then let's bring engineering or whatever it is. But if you don't do it manually, it's a question of doing it super manual and then documenting and really observing every little thing, really like a curious cat attitude to really learn. And then once you nail it, then you bring in engineering. Otherwise, you don't know what to build. And it was really reinforcing to have the Airbnb founders come and talk. They really did that. That was one thing. Like they themselves took photos of the places and went to see the people in the apartment. That's what they learned, that it made a difference, the photos, all sorts of little things.
Why do you think Andreessen Horowitz and Tau Ventures and the others invested in your company?
Oh, that's a great question. There's a podcast and I think an essay by our partner at Andreessen Horowitz about it. I think they really saw the cleverness of, hold on, there's a whole world of drugs that are tested on dogs.
Hmm.
And that data, you can access it. And then that's kind of doesn't get really used, really. I mean, it gets used in the sense that then it helps inform when it goes to humans, but it never comes back to that species. And dogs concurrently are going from being kind of a worker, co-evolved with human, as a worker, and then as a best friend, and especially after COVID, is like as a family member. I know you're in Hong Kong, for example, and we've had folks from Hong Kong say they took their dog with cancer to the human oncologist. So I mean, it's a global thing. It's
Hmm.
not just. I think within those dynamics, it's really interesting because we can kind of take something that's considered like collateral, like a scrap. The data in dogs, I mean, it was used for something, but kind of let's move on. We take that and we almost repurpose that in a really meaningful way that impacts a family because the dogs, they have such benefit for mental health. They are really, really, really more and more important in everyone's lives. And then you have this disease state that's a huge unmet need, but just has like these interesting problems and this potential. I think there's a potential to create the asset class, to create the market is kind of the big one.
There are a number of competitors in the market, the big pharma companies. Like I have worked in pharma for 5 years. Recently, I spoke to the head of China for pet care of Mars. They are working on actually bringing the product of doing a DNA test for your pets. How do you compete with them? Like when they see that there is success in a company, either they can collaborate or they may actually build a product on their own.
Couple of points. They definitely have a distribution. For those that don't know, Mars owns like lots of the animal clinics.
Yes.
I think they have pet food. They're really a big conglomerate. It's a family-owned conglomerate. They definitely have distribution. But like in so many industries, they generally are not the very cutting edge innovators
Hmm.
because you really need an unusual mindset. You really need an ecosystem like the Y Combinator, the Andreessen Horowitz. We're in the middle of Silicon Valley doing this crazy idea. I mean, my neighbor is a founder.
Yeah.
Like you can't help it but go forward in a way, right? I think that's really hard to beat. They to us are kind of like partners.
Hmm.
and could be down the line potential acquirers or the other way. I mean, who knows? There's like lots of opportunity. But basically, that's how I would look at it more than an issue now. And maybe I'm too into it, but I just think what we do is such a great team and we really just work with the top people in the world in what we do that it's just better. Like
Yeah.
it's be hard to pull this off.
How do you get your teams to collaborate, given that you have a mix of technical people, you have people who come from the pharma background, and the other sets of the ecosystem? How do these cross-functional teams work with each other?
I mean, that's a really good question, and it's a really tough one. We're highly interdisciplinary, and that I think is the future. It's the present, even. It's the way to go. But it takes building a culture and a common narrative and making sure. And in COVID, people are not coming into the same office, everyone's distributed, which has its benefits too. We can unlock incredible talent in places maybe in the past we wouldn't have thought of. It has a benefit, but the downside is you're not coming to an office together where we
Hmm.
can keep each other right on the same page. The beauty is that by bringing these different minds together as aligned in the mission, you really can like transform, really transform, because it's not coming from exactly what we were just saying. A large corporate that is only in one sector will just have a type. We're kind of bringing in top people from very different walks of life. The thing to guard against is just making sure everyone is on the same page and that
Hmm.
we're speaking kind of understanding each other. For that, you have to really up the game in terms of the corporate goals, the culture, and then all the different ways to communicate in a distributed way, stay in touch. You know what I mean? All
Yes.
tools, and that becomes really important.
Now we get to the exciting part of the interview, which is a rapid fire. Three
Okay,
questions, one word, or a one sentence. Are you ready?
ready.
What is the toughest part of your job?
I think dealing with folks that are really negative on us because we're kind of a new thing and don't understand. It's for mission
Yeah.
people, it's really hard.
Don't focus on them.
That's right.
One book or a blog that has transformed you professionally and personally.
I love Ben Horowitz, hard things, the hard things about hard things, chapter 4. And then lots of the A16Z blogs and podcasts. One about creating a market is amazing. And then more in our field, the
Hmm.
bio podcasts talking about real world data versus traditional clinical trials. I mean, goes on, but they're like amazing.
Your most favorite superhero.
Wow. I mean, the first word is like superwoman.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you, Christina, for being on the 1% project.
Thank you so much.
My three takeaways from this conversation are: number one, build a business competitiveness through focusing on hard problems to solve and solve it with the smartest people available. Second, before you build something new, first do it manually and document your observations and understand it. Third, how to think and build a business from available technology and data and create a business model disruption. If you have any inputs or suggestions about this conversation or any previous conversations, please drop me an email or a voice message at pritish@1%.live. You can find the show notes for this episode and every other episode on 1%.live. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it on social media and leave a review. See you next time.